Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. First off, it is super cold today in New York City, but despite appearances, I am not wearing my coat inside. This is my new parka/shirt. It's like a parka built into a shirt, almost like a vest built into it. And it has like a parka front and back and then regular sleeves. I actually really like it. It really works to keep me warm and I think it looks okay inside, but I didn't want that to distract people throughout the episode being like, what is she wearing? And sometimes people ask me where I get some of my stuff, so just for those people who are curious, this is actually from Lululemon. All right, so on to the morning movie news. All right, so the first story of the day. Now, yesterday, the Godzilla trailer dropped. It was amazing. I've watched it so many times already, and I can't wait to see it in front of The Hobbit on Friday in 3D. So, super excited for that. But anyway, in the beginning of my trailer review, I had said I hadn't been this excited for a trailer since World War Z. And I knew it would happen, and sure enough, some people kind of were a little snarky, being like, whoa, you like World War Z? And World War Z continues to be a sore point between moviegoers. I guess it's like my Man of Steel. Some people are always like, why you always gotta rag on Man of Steel, Grace? And I'm always kind of like, why's everyone gotta rag on World War Z? Great movie. It made $540 million worldwide, and to date it is the 10th highest grossing movie of the year. Now, I don't think it'll retain that spot by the end of the year when you have something like The Hobbit coming out, etc. But still, that's impressive, and it's the most highest grossing film of Brad Pitt's career. So I think, I think it deserves some street cred there. Even if people didn't love it, I respect people's not wanting to like it, but I would ask that people respect my enjoying World War Z. And a lot of people liked World War Z, apparently, because they were planning a sequel. And anytime a movie makes that much money, they're like, let's make another one. Especially if they hadn't spent so much money having to reshoot the last third, it would have probably been very profitable. But I think right around now, maybe Ancillary might maybe push them further into the black, but I think they about broke even. But still, they were like, damn, there's an audience for this. So yesterday, late in the day, the greatest, coolest story broke, which just made me so happy, and that is that they have found their director for World War Z 2. Now, they didn't want Marc Forster back because, word on the street, word on, the Hollywood and Vine, was that he was very difficult to get along with and didn't really know how to direct a blockbuster. I mean, he did an okay job. They pulled it out at the end, but, we're talking about the guy who directed Quantum of Solace. Who would hire him in the first place? But anyway, he's not coming back. The person who is coming on board, though, is JA Bayona. That's like the greatest news ever. He is a contemporary, or, maybe not a contemporary, you could say maybe protege of Guillermo Del Toro. He directed The Orphanage, one of the scariest horror films I've ever seen. It's up there with The Conjuring, actually, which I will discuss more later in the year. The Conjuring actually so far has made it onto my top 10 list of 2013. But The Orphanage is certainly right up there. If you like The Conjuring, go rent The Orphanage, subtitles and all. But also he directed The Impossible. And in my review for The Impossible, I was like, why doesn't a comic book movie pick this guy up? He's so talented. But apparently, Brad Pitt, he's recognizing this talent and pulling him over. Now, of course, JA Bayona is doing this new Showtime show, which is kind of like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type show, which, interestingly enough, but apparently he'll have time or make time to work on World War Z 2. I think he's a fantastic choice, and I think his sensibility as a director matches Marc Forster's, and the kind of UN is the center of a blockbuster, which is what I personally found so appealing with the first World War Z. So I think this is a great choice, and I think people like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, who I often comment are very smart producers as well as actors, continue to be clever in that they pick top directors to work with. As it's often said, actor-director combos are crucial to people's careers on both ends. Think Johnny Depp and Tim Burton, Martin Scorsese and first De Niro, now Martin Scorsese and DiCaprio. These are all very important collaborations. And I think that, Brad Pitt has a couple of directors that he's working with. And he, of course, is a big Oscar contender because he believed in Steve McQueen. So kudos to him. And also people were pointing out that it was very interesting news that not only was J.A. Bayona signed to do World War Z 2 for Paramount, but Plan B, Brad Pitt's production company, which is behind World War Z, has decided to actually leave Paramount. I guess they're still having some films set up like World War Z, and some of the other projects that were already there. But going forward, they're actually moving over with New Regency. And also, interestingly, Brett Ratner's film financing company. Brett Ratner he's directing some movies, has a new Hercules. He's been mentioned to direct a new Beverly Hills Cop, but also he seems to have found quite a nice career as a film financier. And so he'll be joining that group with New Regency and Brad Pitt. So that's very interesting to see that happening. They all worked together on 12 Years a Slave, and I guess it worked out so well. And some people have said, oh, well, it's interesting that, Paramount was upset that they didn't feel 12 Years a Slave was accurately represented to them, and so they passed on it, even though it was brought to them first, as Plan B is contractually obligated to do, or was contractually obligated to do. So Plan B then took it to New Regency. I guess you could argue that Plan B kind of fudged the pitch so that they could go to New Regency. But anyway, apparently everyone's happy. They're still making World War Z at Paramount, and this is just some interesting Hollywood politicking. All right, so that's the first story of the day. I'm so happy for JA Bayona. I really want him to move to the big leagues. He deserves it. He's a really talented director, and this might be it. Oh, good for him. All right, he and Duncan Jones. It's just so exciting. Gareth Edwards from Godzilla yesterday, to see this new crop of directors. It's not all about, like the old masters, and people thought for a while only Christopher Nolan was coming up, and he was the only big gun after an era of Spielberg and the like. J.J. Abrams, I think people had high hopes for, but I think he's on the bubble right now. But anyway, very exciting. All right, second story of the day is that Andrew Garfield came out saying, look, I don't know what Sony says, but I'm only making 3 of these Spider-Man movies. That's it. After that piece, I'm out. And Mark Webb kind of backed him up saying, I have a trilogy in mind. We're all kind of making a trilogy here. Well, I think Sony would indeed be surprised by that news because they have booked Spider-Man 4 in theaters, and all these movies are 2 years apart, 2014, 2016, 2018. And it's hard to reboot an entire franchise, recast, bring in a whole new crew in 2 years, the 2016 to 2018 jump. When you have your movies 2 years apart, that's kind of a well-oiled machine behind that to make that work. So they are seeing through 4, but you've seen this before. Nolan's group, they were like, we're only making 3. Sorry, Warner Brothers, and everyone was like, what? But here's what I also have to say. Besides Sony booking that 4th date for Amazing Spider-Man 4, if these people are only signing on for 3 movies and that's it, for like artistic reasons, that a trilogy is a story arc, blah 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 blah. Why is Hollywood so focused on signing these younger actors? The whole argument they were using was they were like, oh, well, since Andrew Garfield's in his late 20s, he can make this movie forever. He can be Spider-Man for decades. And apparently Andrew Garfield was like, you should have written that in my contract because that's not my vision. But I think that that's why I have a problem with them casting so young in the Avengers. They've got Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen are the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and it frustrates me that all the female characters in the Avengers movies are like 20-somethings, early 30s, and then a lot of your Sam Jackson, Robert Downey Jr. Those characters are Mark Ruffalo. You have actors in their 40s, late 40s. I think Samuel Jackson's even older than that. So it would be nice to kind of spread out the age group on the female side as well. And so, and also with guys, nobody wants to see a movie a bunch of 20-somethings. And that's the direction they're going with the new Fantastic Four. They're like, let's cast a bunch of 20-somethings. And it's like the whole, why don't you differentiate this by making this like a really mature? Reed Richards has gray temples, for heaven's sakes. Do something interesting. When they cast Doctor Strange, is he going to be like 19? It's like so ridiculous. Everyone likes to see diversity in many different areas. So, but Hollywood was always saying, hey, you know what? We cast him young so we can keep him for a long time. But if that is not the case, what is the point of doing that? Get the best actor. Get the greatest personality. Look who everybody's gravitated towards. Robert Downey Jr., Tom Hiddleston. People like the funny characters. They like the personality. And I think Hollywood consistently gets it wrong when they're casting who they're picking. Ridiculous. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story, I think this is kind of in bad taste. Basically, Fox feels that Fast 7 will move. So far, Universal hasn't said anything. They're like, leave us alone. We're dealing with a lot of stuff, obviously. It's a very difficult time for us. It's a crummy time for us, very sad. We're just trying to sort this out respectfully towards Paul Walker with his death, and also to the fans and to the movie and by everybody who's, wrapped up in this as a job and as their career. I know this is supposed to be a big film for James Wan, and, now it's becoming, understandably, it's not, if not becoming something else, certainly taking on a very tricky layer and tragic layer. And so if they don't want to make a tragic Fast 7, obviously, but at the same time they just can't, I've heard rumors of recasting the role, kind of like the way they replaced Katie Holmes with Maggie Gyllenhaal from in The Dark Knight after the Batman Begins, which I think would be just one of the most appalling and poor taste things ever. And so I hope that is not true. I think that's just appalling. But anyway, Fox feels they're going to move. They feel that there's no way that Universal can make their date in summer 2014. So they've moved Dawn of the Planet of the Apes to that date to kind of like get dibs on it. And I just think that's in really poor taste. I think that you shouldn't be trying to capitalize off of an actor's death, and at least wait for the film to move. So, but because I think that Fast 7 would completely crush Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, no matter what, even if Paul Walker hadn't passed away. I just think it's a stronger property. Some of you don't have respect for Fast 7, but don't forget, this is a movie that makes like over 600 million worldwide. It's a very big franchise. You might not personally like it, but you have to realize that it is a Hollywood juggernaut. So that's what's going on there. Oh yes, I also wanted to bring up the fact that will Fast 7 have to move to 2015? I think that would be a disaster for the movie. 2015 is just too damn crowded. So if they're going to move off of their summer 2014 date, they're going to have to do a holiday release, I think. I think having to push to 2015 would be too far away. And people want to see this movie, even to some degree, even more so now. So those are the three stories of the day. The question comes from Elliot Mason. Hey Grace, big fan of the show. Thank you, Elliot. Quick question. With new superhero movies being announced left and right, and cinematic universes being built at various studios, it seems like comic book movies might be becoming oversaturated, and as a result, quality and consumer interest might take a hit. Very well worded, Elliot, and I believe you might be right. With this in mind, do you think video game movies will make a rise to compete in mainstream popularity, as comic book movies, or Elliot said CBMs, do currently? And which of the upcoming video game adaptations do you think will finally hit the mark of quality and popularity to compete with the other blockbusters? Warcraft, Ratchet and Clank, Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, Need for Speed, Deus Ex, Tomb Raider, etc. Very interesting question, Elliot. I do think comic book movies are in a little bit of trouble. I think they're coming out so fast and furious, 2 to 3 a year from a single studio, giving us multiple ones, that there is a very big chance of viewer fatigue. So that's one concern. As for comic book movies, video game movies, as we all know, they've had serious problems being adapted. The quality has not been there. I think Resident Evil is the most successful video game franchise, and even video game players feel it does not do justice to the game and is very far removed from it. It's really more of a Milla Jovovich franchise. I really wouldn't know how much this video game roots come into it. But as for the movies you mentioned, I think I have very high hopes for Warcraft. I think a lot of people do, largely because of the talent involved. That's going to be the key here. Just like comic book movies didn't really do well until good talent was involved both in front of and behind the camera, you're going to have the same situation. I mean, Resident Evil is, with all due respect to it, is kind of a B to maybe high C level franchise. It's not an A level movie. And neither is the talent. Milla Jovovich is good, but she's not an A-level actress. And of course, there's Paul W.S. Anderson, who is infamously a low B, high C director. But there's nothing wrong. Those movies are enjoyable and have their fan base, but they're never going to reach the levels that these big blockbusters need to reach. So when you're getting talent like Duncan Jones, and for instance, I believe Tom Hardy is considered for Splinter Cell, Michael Fassbender for Assassin's Creed, that's going to really help those movies. For instance, they had I forget the name, it's the Assassin movie with the guy with the bald head. I'm not a video gamer. I'm sorry. I only have room for so much stuff in my head, and right now it's movies, TV, and comics. So video games just didn't make it in there. And also I follow the news. There's just no room for video games. I'm sorry. Video games and music are my two blind spots. So I think that Need for Speed, I don't know about that one. That seems a little B to C in terms of quality level to me. I mean, all respect to Aaron Paul, but it's just not like a big, huge, great movie, like a Mission Impossible type movie. But we could be surprised. But I do, of the picks you said, Warcraft, Assassin's Creed, and Splinter Cell, because of the A-level talent involved. So that's very interesting. So do I believe these movies will move up? I think they can. I think if they make the kind of concerted effort. And the question is, can they coexist with comic book movies, or will audience interest jump from one to the next? Will we have different eras, or will this just be a whole new genre-friendly friendly era of filmmaking where everyone wants big splashy special effects, and the source material that serves that best, comic books, video games, does really well. Also, the other big question here, comic book publishers have very little power because comic books, for all the attention they're getting right now, actually don't sell very well. The numbers are very low. I think the highest selling comic book is like around 125,000 copies, like 125,000, that's it. That's very few copies. That's less than people watch cable television sometimes. Very small sales numbers. So they don't have a lot of pull, and they're already owned by the studios. Obviously, DC by Warner Brothers and Marvel by Disney. So there's not a problem there. There isn't having to compromise. But with video game movies, the problem there is that video game companies are extremely powerful. They pull in as much and sometimes often more money than movies. You see in the headlines all the time that video games are pulling in $1 billion in just a matter of days, sometimes 24 hours. So they are extremely powerful. They don't have to just give in to Hollywood. They are independent. And so that's also, I think, what's holding up video game movies a little bit. That they don't need Hollywood, and they also want to have a lot of artistic say, I'm sure, or sharing in the wealth of the movie, the gross. And Hollywood doesn't like that kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons that Halo fell through. Microsoft wanted to be too heavily involved. So that's my answer to your question. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in. Write down below what you think of today's 3 stories, the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see. Oh, tomorrow there will be no morning movie news because it's the Golden Globe nominations. So I'll be covering that instead. But Friday, write down anything you want to see covered on Friday and any questions you might have for that. Thanks so much for watching. See you later. Bye.